We'll have to see how it works. Maybe nobody's going to listen to us ever again.
I don't have it.
It'll show up. That's also a pinned post.
Oh.
So you have to go to our live videos.
Post-Orthodoxy is live now.
It's true.
Hey!
It's us.
Yeah.
So this is the first episode of season 1. 2.
First episode, S2E1.
S2E1. We couldn't label the episode numbers of the previous season because we didn't know what episode we were on by the time we decided we wanted to label them.
That's right.
Yeah, so...
episode 52 or 48, I don't know.
Right. I don't know. We did a lot. We're going to work through it. We're going to put all our most popular and important shows up first, like the history of the drug war in the U.S.
Well, yeah.
Definitely doing that one first. Sam Thompson's in the house. He says, woot.
All right.
Appreciate you, Sam. So you might not know what's going on, folks, whenever you hit this video, but this is the first episode of Post-Orthodoxy Season 2. We're live streaming from home right now. Currently, our kit is my cell phone and this workshop light, and we want to get some microphones and a better camera so that we can do a show for you guys that's enjoyable for you to watch and listen to, and also have quality audio to put on a podcast for later.
Oh, yeah.
I should probably get that little audio thing and start it also while we're sitting here.
Audio thing?
Yeah, I have that little audio thing I've been borrowing so we can record. So this isn't going to be a full 2 hours, so you don't have to be in for 2 hours or die. But as you guys join the video, leave us a chat and let us know where you're listening from. That always helps. We like to know who's tuning in. If I know you already, whatever, but leave us a chat anyway. And then in about 10 minutes, we're going to call our friend Evno Omi in Honolulu, who is working for KTUH.
Correct.
And I'm going to put a link to their Facebook page. If you'd like, there's also, you can listen to the audio of our interview
live,
and Evno's show, because he's going to be doing an educational show every Sunday morning.
Yes.
After this point, it's Sunday morning over there. So I'll share that in our chat for you guys if you'd like to get in touch with KTUH.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still dealing with new Facebook, so bear with me.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. All right, here we go. First comment. Link to KTUH on Facebook, which is the radio station we're going to be doing an interview on.
Right. Well, we're glad to be back on, even in the Gonzo Light camera/audio category. We're happy to be back with an update on what happened with Post-Orthodoxy Radio Edition. We're going to be interviewed by Evno, so I think we're just going to follow his questions and answer. He's been following the drama via our Post-Orthodoxy Facebook page. And then after we're through, the interview with Evno is only going to be 15-20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then we can come back and answer any questions that you guys have about what happened. Questions, comments. Mm-hmm. As always, we are open to hearing from all opinions and perspectives.
We're never trying to pretend that you're not talking to us.
We're not shutting anybody down for asking any question.
Yeah, what is our show heckin' even about, honey?
Post-Orthodoxy is a show about changing our minds, about being able to try on different perspectives and perhaps isolate cognitive biases that we may or may not know about, understanding new things like availability bias. Do you know what availability bias is?
Availability bias is, I think this must be true because it's what I hear all the time.
Everybody says it must be the thing that is true.
Right.
So we explore things around cognitive liberty, availability bias, cult-like behaviors. You may be in a cult and not know it.
And we know because we grew up in cults.
Yeah, this is what we bring to the table.
But we're not here to cast judgment on the cult-like upbringing. We're here to enable you to liberate your mind in whatever way is healthy for you.
Right. So I'm going to call Evno.
Let's do it.
All right. Let's see how much noise it makes.
Hopefully you guys will be able to hear. Alright, let me do this thing.
He's calling.
Mark Hayden says, glad you are on and never off.
Yay!
That's so sweet. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Hello, Evno.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
All right, sounds good. We got about a minute left of the song. How are you guys feeling? Is there any particular directions or thoughts after last night that came up?
Not really. We would like to introduce you to our audience, and then you can introduce us to your audience, and then tell us about your new show and why we're on it.
Okay, I can do that. It depends how things either. I may be limited in time only because I've been told there's a gas leak in the building and they're deciding whether or not to evacuate.
Oh, okay.
I'm guessing we can't say certain words.
Yes. So
Standard radio words.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys weren't allowed certain words either.
Yes.
When you were on air, pretty much the same words.
Right.
Can do.
George Carlin 7.
We'll try to respect the ye olde format of radio.
We will.
Yeah.
We will.
Yeah,
No worries.
Yes, we'll do it.
And right now, this is the end of a song called Big Brother by Trilak Urtu.
I'm glad you played the Brian Von Ossen song.
Oh, yeah. Have you heard his new stuff?
Not yet.
Okay. He's getting pretty out there. It's fun. But we got 20 seconds left.
Okay.
You can interview me if you want, and then before we get into your story, we'll see where it goes.
Let's see where it goes.
Yeah.
It's the beauty of live radio. 10 seconds.
All right. Once again, that was Trilak Urtu with Big Brother off of the release African Fantasy. I am DJ Eoni. You are tuned into Know Thyself right here on KTUH, and I have the honor of being on the phone with Darken Ainsley Savior, the host of Post-Orthodoxy out there in Butte, Montana. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us on the show.
So I know that we're doing weird things, but you had some questions for me. I have some questions for you. Would you like to start as the guest?
Well, we're both doing shows at the same time. So for our viewing and listening audience, could you introduce yourself, your position at the UH, and what this new show is?
Okay, so my name is DJ Eoni. My position is generally a miscreant of thought, getting people to explore things in new ways. I have 3 degrees in philosophy. I've been teaching it for about 10 years in one way or another, and the purpose of the show Know Thyself is to give people insights perhaps into how their own minds work, how their own systems work, and find stability within that, because as we are approaching a rapidly more unstable world, I find that having that strength and fortitude within is going to be really helpful. But again, the opinions heard here are not necessarily those of the station or anyone else.
Very good. Thanks for having us on your show. So, folks, we know who we're being interviewed by. Would you like Ainsley and I to introduce ourselves to your audience?
So I know. Well, let's start with what is Post-Orthodoxy that you guys have been producing for the last few years?
I'm going to let Ainsley open that one up.
Can you hear me all right, DJ Omi?
Yep. Yes, we can.
All right. So Post-Orthodoxy we're entering our 2nd season. Before Post-Orthodoxy started, we were doing a show called Copacetic Conversations with our friend Mokai Malope from South Africa. And he wanted to get to know all kinds of U.S. citizens. And so we were basically doing a series of interviews with people who have strongly held belief systems in an attempt to learn how to have interviews about difficult subjects without fighting each other or hating each other. And when he had to go back to South Africa, we modulated Copacetic Conversations into Post-Orthodoxy so that we could continue talking about difficult subjects. And especially Dark and I use Post-Orthodoxy to air our own evolutions over the radio or now by online live stream, as both of us have grown up in super conservative religious groups and have since been pursuing our own cognitive liberty, and how do we educate ourselves and how do we know that we're thinking our own thoughts. Post-Orthodoxy has a lot of taglines. Basically, it's a show about changing our minds and getting to know what is outside our individual reality bubbles.
Right.
And how do you negotiate outside of your bubble once you get out?
Yeah. We're trying
I mean, it's also the case that a lot of people are very afraid to get outside of their bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. We're trained that to step outside the way that you know reality is scary and there are monsters out there and probably you'll be a bad person if you do it. But what we're trying to do on Post-Orthodoxy is we just this morning, we're constantly coming up with new ways to define what we're doing. And this morning we said, you know what, we're surveyors. We are surveying the borderlands between belief systems and trying to set up an outpost in the borderlands for people who are traveling between and beyond belief systems and strongly held convictions to help people learn and to gain more education for ourselves as we're all trading information and pathways and possibilities in this outpost.
So for me to add on to that, even though both of us came from, I'll do the shorter version, cults. Having been raised in cults, negotiating the world outside of a monolithic reality is tough. And so we often look at religion, but when we say post-orthodoxy, we're talking about orthodoxies of religion, of political party partisanship, of sexual mores, of societal norms. So it's always about questioning the things that we're usually dissuaded from questioning. So
right, and I think that having that experience in coming from cults probably gives you guys a very interesting point of view. And I'm curious, with all of that, what sort of cults have you seen form or shore up or start to prevent in exchange of thought more and more over the last 5-10 years?
I can bring up something pretty immediate.
Go for it.
Our radio show was censored, and then we were gagged from talking about the censorship, and then we were banned from the radio station in the last couple of weeks. The ostensible excuse is that we were dangerous and sharing dangerous information. The one of the new orthodoxies that we've decided to poke at, which is a very recent, we know where the timeline on the map is of this orthodoxy, how it started and where it is now. And that orthodoxy is around the discussion of whether or not masks are good things to wear during a pandemic. So we're not saying we have a position on masks. We're saying the discussion around masks has become problematic because a medical issue has been politicized.
Anytime you're not supposed to ask a question about something is a problem.
Right, and it's very interesting as well with that, how it's on both sides. Like, I mean, I personally think that masks are very helpful, but at the same time, I've been in circles where I have been shamed for wearing a mask.
Right.
Yes.
That's part of what we're talking about is the culture around the shame. So when I've been trying to talk to people who are big mask advocates and they want everyone to wear a mask, I ask them if they think shaming people into wearing a mask is going to be a productive conversation. And that's what we're talking about. It's not enough just to say it's a good idea. You have to be able to communicate the reasons why, and shaming people is not a compelling argument, in my experience, to get people to change their minds.
And there are people being shamed to wear a mask and people being shamed for wearing a mask.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's not been any consistent education about what kind of mask actually keeps you safe, what kind of mask keeps the people around you safe, and is the mask beneficial for everybody, or do we know which people in our society are at risk for SARS-CoV-2 infections, and is a mask actually what's protecting those people the most?
So we're trying to have
Right.
it's a complex issue that we're trying to have a complex dialogue around, but people who have reduced it to a binary political argument just decide if we are not pro-mask or if we are not anti-mask, we are the opposite of them.
When in fact there are multiple viewpoints and a lot of scientific data all over the spectrum.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the same as the false dichotomy of political choices that
Right.
we see these days. The issue, though, it comes up is, as I'm sure you guys have witnessed, with the events that have gone on, with the constant barrage at the media of fear, of this, of that, of the other side, do you think that people are in a place where they can listen to the information? Because, you know, again, I completely agree with you. It needs to be shared. We need to have spaces where the conversation can take place. But I also think that there's a bit of PTSD going on, and people are just outright rejecting anything that makes them feel further uncomfortable because of this sense of unease.
I think PTSD and trauma is a massive part of what's going on socially, at least in the U.S. right now. And although we do have some correspondence on post-Orthodoxy from other countries, really we just have to keep speaking to what's going on in the U.S. because that's our biggest experience. And there is so much trauma right now around the current administration that I think naturally and instinctively people are very protective right now of their belief systems, and anything that challenges the way that you think the world is a danger.
Indeed. I do need to remind all of our listeners that the opinions and views heard here are not necessarily those of KTUH, its licensees, or management, or any of its staff. But we are happy to provide a place for all these points of view. And I think that that was something else you brought up in having witnessed your show. It's that there is this underground thing of that people don't want to talk about, but a lot of people believe, right? I have had people within my circle become adherents of the phenomenon called QAnon.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of actually describing what their beliefs are and why they're so problematic, most other forms of media are just starting to talk about, oh, they're a conspiracy, we don't give them any intention or attention at all.
Yeah, that can be a big
there
problem.
There are people around us who are coming to believe these things, who are acting on these beliefs. And no conversation can be had to even reach out or to find out what is going on unless, you know, one is entering the cabal of it, as it were.
So that was, I think, probably one of the most triggering things about the show that the radio station says is why we were let go from the station, is that we were talking about some Centers for Disease Control data that has to do with the provisional death counts around SARS-CoV-2, how many people were infected unexpectedly who had no prior illnesses, and how many people died with SARS-CoV-2 infections who had previous illnesses that led them to be more susceptible. And we feel like that conversation is a really important conversation to have because it lets us know more of who we should be protecting in society, who we should be giving grocery shopping services to, who we should be making sure that they have access to real medical grade masks and protective equipment. But unfortunately, a lot of our friends thought that we were associating ourselves with a QAnon tweet that Trump had retweeted. Now, Dark and I don't follow Trump or QAnon on Twitter, so we didn't know that he had retweeted this data. And I think it alarmed people who maybe don't know that QAnon is basically like a treasure hunt to try to catch pedophiles. And they just see...
It's like an app game.
Yeah, they just see QAnon as big, scary bad guys on the red team, so that's bad, and the opinions expressed by the people on this show are not those of KTUH or its affiliates. But I think that's why a lot of...
You can leave those to me.
I just want to be covering my bases. I think a lot of people found that to be really triggering because, like you said, QAnon rose up as part of the quote-unquote other team to a lot of our blue team friends, and so therefore we don't need to know anything about it.
Right.
In their opinion.
We've been doing a lot of meditating on censorship in the last few weeks, and it seems that there's a pretty repeatable and observable cause and effect that happens when you try to censor unpopular information. It immediately becomes more popular.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
And I have friends of mine that were very happy to see a lot of right-wing Twitter pages and Facebook pages censored, and they're like, yay, they censored them.
Censor the bad guys, quote unquote.
And I thought that's a real slippery slope. One, because I think it's useful to know who is in QAnon and who is in the KKK. I think if they want to put their names and put it on a Facebook page, they're doing everybody a favor because they're out in the open and you know who they are. I think when you censor those voices of people who are in your neighborhood, now you don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And if you're going to censor that side, when power changes, there's now a precedent for you to be shut up because your view is unpopular.
Now you're the unpopular thing, and I do think it's important. This is why we study things that you're not supposed to study, because that's how we know that QAnon is not just a bunch of people touting horrific white supremacist ideologies. QAnon began as a quest to hunt down and punish pedophiles, which is something that I think most feeling humans would get behind.
Right.
Well, I mean,
it's complex. It's complex.
It's not even, but is it an evil? Is it a disease? All of these things. Harming anybody, especially children, is definitely a horrific act. What I do want to look at, though, is more your point of in the censoring of data, in the censoring of viewpoints, even abhorrent viewpoints, what happens is not only do they become louder in certain areas, but the ability to dialogue ends. And with the ability to dialogue ending, each side will tend to get more set in its own dogma and, more extreme in its views and unable to even see the others as human.
Yes. In one thing that I've observed, I'll speak for myself and she can chime in. One thing I've observed in the last 2 weeks is that the people who were most vocally opposed to what we were doing on the air, I don't think understood what we were doing on the air. And I think there's also a crossover of those people tend to be, I know most of them, and most of them are, I would say, traumatized by our current political climate. I would say they have Trump trauma. And they're in denial that this is happening. That it's in the language that they use. And part of their disgust with, and I'm getting really vague and I'm trying to follow a line of thought, but it feels like it permeates this whole censorship issue, is their disgust of somebody like Trump is that he's a liar, he's unaccountable, and he's mean. And the people who have been most traumatized by that are now becoming unaccountable, liars, and mean, because they can justify it in opposition to somebody else who is doing that.
That's a race to the bottom in general, right?
Yes.
Is when you want to respond, they did me bad, so I'm going to do them worse, right? There's a lot of talk of pettiness and other things these days. So the question becomes is how do you give them a place to feel heard or to express this trauma even if the outside media is bombarding with the fear and the trauma, and they feel, okay, well, they can only talk comfortably with those within their own circle, and therefore everyone without that circle is an enemy. And I completely grasp that it seems ridiculous, but at the same time, can we look at this from a compassionate perspective and say, well, what would need to happen in order to cure our cultural traumas in these ways?
You want to take that one?
Oosh. Gosh, we have been participating in a really fantastic conference this weekend. It's a virtual conference, it's an intimacy retreat, so it's a bunch of people talking on various subjects that have to do with relationships. And I've been picking up some really great terms, and one of them is the vulnerability hangover. And I mentioned that to bring awareness to the fact that this kind of trauma work, it is physically and emotionally draining. It's maybe simple to carefully walk through what you're scared of, but it's definitely not easy. And I think that these sorts of conversations that people can have with each other, where you just sit down, maybe across from each other, both of you are sitting on a pillow on the floor, and you're cross-legged or whatever's comfortable for you, and one of you says, here's the way things are, and here's how it makes me feel, and the other person says, here's how the way I think things are, and here's how the way that makes me feel. That's already a massive step in the right direction, and even a small, simple conversation like that can have a huge difference.
I think part of the blockage to this is the folks who are most traumatized are likely not aware that they're traumatized.
They don't think of themselves that way.
They don't think of themselves as being traumatized. They're just now down for a very serious fight. And a lot of the people that have been most vehement and vocal in politics are people who don't know. My experience has been they came late to the game of politics.
Maybe got involved recently because the current president speaks a lot differently than presidents in the past, and so it's easy to point to him and say, I don't like how that person is talking, as opposed to the other presidents who at least spoke nicely when they did things that we didn't like.
And I think another thing to keep in mind is there's a website called Hidden Tribes, hiddentribes.us, and it's a survey of where we are as a country in terms of the extreme left, the extreme right, and people who are in the middle and some gray areas in between. And I think when I'm looking at the information, they're basically saying the vocal folks are an extreme minority. Like 10% of the most vocal stereotype.
The most vocal political groups in the U.S.
Yeah, so like on the right, there's like 10% of those folks are the extreme stereotype that we think of the right. And 10% or 9% of people on the liberal or left side are the vocal dogmatic ones. But there's so many more people who don't get involved with that dialogue or involved in the Facebook discussions because they don't feel that extreme. And so we think about our country being divided between these two extremes, but they're very vocal minorities, and I think the conversation needs to be talking to people who are not in the extreme, which is the vast majority of the country.
So we opened this
I think that there's another element of people you're missing there. And I think that especially in your area, I can see that cross-referencing happening. But I also see a number of people, and, you know, I am biased by my own circles, I fully admit, but I see a group of people that already feel that neither side is speaking for them. So it's not like they be on one extreme or the other, but nobody is willing to talk about the things they care about. It's just like, at the moment, there is no way people can vote if they actually want, say, an ecologically sustainable future. And I think that this feeling of impotence has also gotten a lot of people to say, well, I don't want to talk about it because if I talk about it, if I do anything, well, nothing can happen towards what I believe anyway, so why get involved?
In this Hidden Tribes, that is the largest group of people that they isolated. They said 67% of Americans can fall into a category that they call the exhausted majority. And the exhausted majority has some things in common. And there are things like they don't feel like their voice they're being addressed in the political dialogue.
Not being represented.
They're not being represented. they feel like in the political dialogue it's too extreme, and they're willing to have compromise, but they can't even get into the dialogue because of the extremity of the argument.
Because you have to pick one side or the other, or you're hateful.
So I think we think about solving the problem by trying to get
those sides stand for the same thing, even if it's not what the people want. Once again, the opinions and views heard here are not necessarily those of KTUH, its licensees, its management, or its staff.
Right.
So you opened the conversation talking about censorship, and we got a comment from one of our live stream viewers and friends here in Butte, Montana. Is it okay if I read that comment on air to redirect the conversation back to censorship?
Well, we've got about 3 minutes left, so I will leave it to you guys where you want us to go before we have to break for the top of the hour stuff.
Understood. I would love to hear your gentlemen's thoughts on this perspective. This is one of the friends of the show, John Ivankovich. It's shaming. People are shaming each other to force their beliefs, agendas, and ideologies onto the rest of the world. This shaming is literally forcing censorship and infringement on people's First Amendment rights. So, like, personally, one-on-one, by shaming each other, we're censoring your if I were shaming you into doing something by trying to make you feel badly for the way you see the world, it's like I'm censoring you one-on-one. What do you guys think about that perspective?
Evno?
Well, I mean, yes, I think that he's right if your purpose is shaming, right? If you're genuinely trying to have a conversation with somebody and trying to understand them, your purpose shouldn't be to express why you think they're wrong. Instead, it should be, being willing to listen and making sure that they feel understood before you start speaking, because that's, these are the techniques of nonviolent communication, and our regular guest, Chris, is a master of that. But the whole idea here is that if you're trying to have a dialogue, the dialogue is not to necessarily try and convince the other person, but it's to let the other person know that, as I value you as a person, I want to make sure I hear your voice so you feel heard. And it's only when somebody usually feels heard that they're willing to open up the space and listen to somebody else.
I agree. More of that.
Are we going to talk with you again after the top of the hour?
Don't shame somebody in a one-on-one conversation. You can have differences of opinion. You can say okay, I don't agree with this belief of yours, but you have to let them speak first. You have to let them feel heard before you try and put your own projection on it.
I think that's one of the rough...
Otherwise, it's just going to run back into butting heads.
Mm-hmm. And again, that comes back down to a lot of the trauma going on in certain groups in the U.S. right now, is that it is very difficult to be vulnerable with someone you disagree with when you feel that their views are causing trauma.
Right.
Right. And that's the thing. And that's why, for me, it is the focus on within. It's like, can you find a way to center yourself and come back to have that space without being traumatized by the things you disagree with?
Yeah, that's the Herculean effort for a lot of us.
Separating what is happening from my feelings about what is happening.
Right.
Right. And not even saying you can't be aware of your feelings, but you can be aware of their feelings, but you don't necessarily need to project them onto others. Because projecting a projectile feeling at each other is part of the problem, right? And the feelings only get louder and more intense and less willing to listen.
Sam Thompson says active listening equals absorbing the thoughts of the other person without thinking about what your reply will be.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Thank you so much, Evno.
I mean, some would say that is part of our American culture, is we want to be heard so much that being heard usually comes in our minds before hearing others. And, maybe we're at a point where that's something to reconsider, or maybe we just need to figure out how that's going. We need to stop at the top of the hour. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you want to find out more about Dark and Ainsley and their show Post-Orthodoxy, you can look up Post-Orthodoxy on Facebook.
Yep.
Is there a website as well?
It's under construction. You can follow all the updates on our Post-Orthodoxy Facebook page.
Facebook is best right now.
All right,
Thank you
for
so
those
much.
that don't have Facebook, you're just going to have to wait. We'll be having these guys back as guests another time. Thank you again. Once again, you are tuned in to Radio for the People, KTUH FM Honolulu. Big thanks to Dark and Ainsley
Thank you, sir.
Xavier, for joining us today.
It's our pleasure. Have a good
Thank
day.
you. All right, we're hanging up on
Hey!
All right, so now we can handle whoever's talking to us.
We have some
Boyce
beefs.
Brown tuned in.
Boyce Brown says,
Yeah, what do you say?
why was the management of KBMF so shocked that a show of opinion and meta news named Post-Orthodoxy contained opinion and meta news about the Orthodox and heterodoxes?
That's a question we ask ourselves.
Every day.
Yes.
Well, really, I think the problem is that it just got a little too triggering. And I know that that's a word that a lot of people get frustrated with because it's overused. And I should say not used responsibly all the time. But in a year full of trauma for a lot of our loved ones, we kept pushing trauma buttons because we're coming from a privileged place where we are not traumatized. And I'm going to take an example from the virtual intimacy retreat that we've been going to this
We
weekend.
have our own traumas.
We have traumas, but we're not currently, we've got a partner, so we're not alone. We're both pretty much white, so we're having a white experience.
It's true.
I'm a very large woman in the world. I'm not having an oppressed experience as a woman. And that kind of is not the experience that a lot of people are having in the US right now. And the people that are having the hardest time is often because they're in a group that is being oppressed by the decisions of the current administration. And so us coming from our place of privilege, of relative safety and calm and peace, and saying, you know what, we should talk about that, we should talk about that, we should talk about that, when our more traumatized friends are like, there's no reason to talk about it because people are dying and being beat up by their neighbors because of what's going on in the country right now. I think a lot of people just got a little worn out of having their buttons pushed.
Yeah.
There's a small listenership to KBMF, and it's mostly extreme blue people.
Yeah.
And because they all follow Trump, they all knew that we were talking about data that had been tweeted by Trump, even though we found it because of other posts elsewhere online, and it was the CDC's data. I don't think a lot of people who were mad at us were actually watching Post-Orthodoxy regularly.
No.
And they are also not coming from a place of emotional and psychological calm to be able to, you have to feel like your cave is safe and you've got enough food for the winter in order to be able to have theoretical conversations about what's going on in the world. And a lot of our friends don't feel safe right now.
It's true.
I don't think it's that they misunderstood what Post-Orthodoxy is about.
I do.
Well, I mean,
I don't think
I
they know
don't
what
think
Post-Orthodoxy is about.
I don't think they watched the show and then misunderstood it. I just think a lot of people just were not watching.
No.
A lot of the people that were mad at us were not people who were participating in post-Orthodox conversations.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks so much to Evno. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Evno.
He's got that nice, sweetie, calm philosopher voice.
So we have the ability to do our show from our house to various degrees. We are looking at improving the degrees in which we will present this content to you, the audience.
We were really good kids for 2 weeks of this struggle with KBMF and the Butte America Foundation because we love those organizations, especially the radio station, and we very much, they kept making it about us and us messing up in some way that they didn't like.
Which is never...
We didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
And we did our best to keep making it about the scary precedents being set at the radio station. Now, we would like to capitalize on being banned content.
Yeah, it's an honor, and I accept that honor.
Yep, we put off talking about this for 2 weeks because we didn't want anybody to think that we were being manipulative or taking advantage of what was going on, but we would really love y'all's help in our GoFundMe so that we can get some real microphones and we don't have to yell at you the whole time.
Right.
And then we can do
It'll change the tone of our show.
Several short shows every week on various topics that you guys bring to the table and that we bring to the table. And if we have the right equipment, we can do interviews with people from all over the globe that everybody can participate in, like this that you see
Radio
on Facebook with the chat.
Right.
And that's our goal, is to be able to do interviews with people all over the planet. And we need some equipment.
That's the working goal. A famous person, I suppose, once said that if people aren't trying to censor your work, are you really doing anything? So I don't take this censorship lightly. We spend our time dealing with the precedents of the censorship in the station being done illegally outside of FCC law, being done outside of the bylaws of the licensee who runs the radio station.
They weren't following their own rules.
They weren't following their own rules. We wanted there to at least be some accountability for the rules having been breached before we talked about how we personally felt about being canned from a station that we helped build. So now we can talk about that a little more. But the main goal today was to have this interview with my friend Evno, is to in the future have more shows that are less us. More people being interviewed, being able to introduce to you some of the things that we're looking in. Our show has always been about us sharing our educational process. Mm-hmm. This is the rabbit hole we went down to find out how polymerase chain reaction tests work, or what happened with HIV and AIDS.
Yeah.
What is the history of our drug policy, and why, even though we know it's racist, is it still happening that way? Mm-hmm. We go down some rabbit holes.
Education for ourselves and for our friends.
And we try to share our process, because that's, I think, one of the big battles in the world today is, where do you get your information? Are you able to see beyond your own biases to realize if you are padding your reality bubble, or if you are actually drawing from the largest possibility of informational sources that might show you something outside of your world. It's not always easy to find something outside of your world if you don't know where to look. So we share our process a lot. And that's what I think we offer, is the homework that we put in. It's not about necessarily the topic we're talking about, but the process that we go through to try to gain a broader perspective of the world that we live in, and have a better understanding of ourselves and the people we share the world with. I think that's probably a big...
That was a lot.
I just went all the way down the road.
What was the question?
The ball started rolling and I couldn't stop it.
I forgot what the question was.
Oh, well, we want to do a better show. So we have a GoFundMe page. We have some folks that are willing to help out with equipment. We're looking for some lights. We're looking for a decent computer. We would like to have a dedicated camera, so she doesn't have to take the case off her phone every week in order to film our show. Mics, lights, computer, etc. We can do it like this, and we're going to keep doing it like this, but we're looking to improve the program. And eventually we have a website coming out, so that you can stay up with the various projects that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. All in one spot, and it will be more inclusive of people who don't like to participate in social media.
Right, basically. a growing majority of exhausted
We're really
people.
committed. There are other platforms out there, other messaging apps that are ways for people to create a community space together online in the time of COVID and in the time of global connectivity. That is outside and beyond Facebook, and we're going to incorporate that into our website so that we can literally be crafting an outpost in the borderlands where people, like-minded people or like-energied people, can be sharing resources with each other. So we have an unrelated plug from a friend of the show.
Oh, yeah.
Stonefruit.media.
We can endorse that, because our opinions are not, they're just our opinions.
We can say, hey, we love... how can I say this in a non-sexually suggestive way? Not pumping our friends up. We love... Hyping our friends up.
Even though I don't like hyping, but yes.
Boyce Brown has 30 years of his artwork online now on a website at stonefruit.media.
I want to share Norm Goodwin's page, too. He just redid his page.
Oh, sweet. What is it?
I'll look it up. Norm Goodwin art, I'll find it. I think
that's awesome.
My message, but we'll find that. We like being a nexus for other folks doing stuff.
Yeah, nexus. What's that thing? You know, I worked in film for a while, off and on, and the thing that, even though I wanted to be acting, the thing that I kept finding myself doing was being a production manager. And what a production manager does is they are the hub from the directorial team to everybody else. So the director says, here's the scene for tomorrow. I've thought it all out. This is what I want us to do. Usually he should be telling you this months in advance, but that was my experience. And then my job is to take that so that he can go have some dinner and send information to the drivers and information to the actors and information to the set decorator and information to the person planning lunch for that day. And so the information comes into me and goes out to a bunch of people, and we just want to do that on this show and in this space to be a place where people can send information and we can send it out to others, because Dark's been talking a lot about circuits. There are a lot of different groups on the planet besides Democrats and Republicans, or Americans and British people, or men and women, or Christians and atheists. There are a lot of groups. And sometimes there's overlap and sometimes there's not. You might be an LGBTQ person that is a part of the BIPOC community, or you might be an LGBTQ person that is just loaded with white privilege. And we can find the intersections of the places where we do match up with each other and we have commonalities, and begin to expand our awarenesses and our abilities, and kind of super boost each other into knowing more about what's going on the planet. And that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Did you find Norm Goodwin's website?
No, I'm working on it.
I ran out of rant.
Okay.
Terror Time says oof, but I don't know what he's oofing about.
I don't either.
Whew.
So,
does anybody have any questions about what's going on or the next season, or you have topics that you want to suggest? We're going to talk about aliens. We're going to talk about mer people.
yeah.
We're going to have a therapist, like a psychosomatic therapist on to talk. We're hoping to do an interview with a sex therapist. We're going to talk with some people about local politics and how local politics are different from federal politics. Represent Us is a really important organization for how you could actually get involved in politics in a way that would make a difference. And so if you have ideas for topics or stuff that you've learned about or stuff that you've changed your mind about, or even if you know somebody that we should reach out to do an interview and then share that interview with everybody in a conversation, then connect us with those people. We absolutely, I mean, like, we were wanting to do this pre-COVID anyway, and then we didn't have the equipment to do online interviews then, but we're, fingers crossed, we're going to gear up and do online interviews. The software is out there. Zoom is amazing. This conference we've been doing this weekend has been really bitchin', actually. Because yeah. So we want to connect with people, have a room where everybody's talking about a particular subject, and you can send people into breakout rooms where you can have 2 or 3 people discussing the subject and taking turns, and then you all come back together again with whoever the expert is in the room. It's really fascinating.
Yes.
So, yeah, we want to know your guys' topics. If you're going around the world, you're like, oh, somebody just told me I'm not allowed to ask questions about that thing. We will go ask questions about that thing.
Yeah, I'm going to share a link to a friend of the show. Norm Goodman has been following our programs for the last year or so, and so I'm going to share a link to some of his artwork because I just got turned onto it last week, and I thought it was worth sharing. One of the topics I want to bring up in a future show is we talk about meta-modern philosophy, meta-modernism.
That's just got to be something we keep defining.
And talking about the idea of being a victim of your culture or being a co-creator of your culture. Are you shaping the culture that you live in, or are you just waiting to see what happens with it? And in that exploration, I'm interested in doing a piece on radical consent language, which is, if you don't know anything about it and you just wade into some of the nerds that are articulating the far expanses.
They're creating the fringe of what consent means.
Right. It's real easy to watch some of that stuff and want to make fun of it. And I want to make fun of it.
Because it's so different from the way that we all communicate with
Very
each other.
much so.
We don't ask. Like, just now with COVID, people have finally started asking each other, is it okay if I give you a hug?
Right. So you need to figure out where that person is before you just assume and do something that they don't like. So I think the tools of radical consent language are really important. I think the far ends of it make it difficult for some people to take seriously. And I'd like to look at both. I'd like to look at the value of these new things that are coming out, maybe some of the potholes that those things face in terms of getting from a niche audience to a more general population. And UFOs are one of those things. Energy workers are one of those things. I think they come about for a reason, and that's what we want to do on Post-Orthodoxy, is talk about things that we don't normally talk about.
Sam suggested we should find 2 addiction specialists.
Yeah.
One that believes addiction is hereditary and a disease, and the other who believes that it is a choice of the addict and we're all just as susceptible to fall into addiction.
Well,
I would really like that.
Similar to germ theory.
Yeah, I would really like to have that conversation because
Yeah.
I think there's been this pervasive push, and I'm coming from a place of my own opinion, which is that addiction is a symptom of trauma. Addiction is something that you get into because you're trying to get away from something. And
you're not a therapist.
I'm not a therapist. No, it's true. But I would love to have a therapist in the room and of varying perspectives, because I know it's been a big story that, it can just get you. If you just try the bad thing, then suddenly you'll just be an addict because your dad had a problem. And that may or may not be scientifically, chemically true. I don't know. So I would like to add that to the list. Thanks for the tip.
So we're looking for questions, topics for shows, and also if there are people out there that you know that you think whose voice should be heard on some post-Orthodox topic, please, you can private message us or leave a link to your peeps in our comment section here.
Terror Time has a question for this show right now that I want to approach very carefully.
Oh.
In this new world.
Yes.
He said, do you think COVID is going away? Or is this just what life is like right now? Forever.
Do you want to try that?
So, I'm going to make sure our live stream is actually going right now before I start waxing eloquent on something that maybe nobody will hear.
Right.
We've had up to 17 people joining us on the live stream today, and that's really,
nice.
really awesome.
Thanks,
I
guys.
can't tell if it's my computer being slow. Is your computer showing us doing stuff?
Yeah, we're doing stuff.
Okay. All right. So as long as you still show that we're live.
Yes, you're frozen over there.
Yeah, I'm super frozen on my computer, so I'm just going to peek over your shoulder and make sure it's still going. All right. So, reload the site. Yes, please. Yeah, I think it's my computer.
Is
COVID going away? So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that lives on this planet now, although it doesn't live because viruses are not alive.
That's true.
But SARS-CoV-2 is the virus
that exists,
just like SARS-CoV-1 was a virus, and MERS was a virus, and influenza A and B are viruses. So it exists on the planet now. COVID is the name for symptoms that you get when SARS-CoV-2 makes you sick. You could have chest pains, and that would be COVID if you have those chest pains because of SARS-CoV-2. You might have bronchitis. You might have total exhaustion for 3 weeks, and those would all be called COVID symptoms because you have SARS-CoV-2 in your system. Now, from my perspective and my education on viruses, I believe that nearly everybody on the planet has already encountered SARS-CoV-2 at this point. I think I think viruses, it's been on the planet for a year now. I think viruses get around and do what they do. And let's face it, there are maybe like 2 people on the whole planet who really actually haven't touched anything or seen anyone, and they're still living in a house with an HVAC system that brings air in from outside.
Right.
So I don't think SARS-CoV-2 is going off of the planet. I don't think influenza A and B will ever be off the planet. We look at a lot of data about COVID, the COVID illness, and how many people on the planet have had this illness so far.
That we know of.
Now, there are lots of people in lots of parts of the world who just got sick for a few days or a week or 2, and they just didn't, maybe they don't watch TV all the time, and so it happened in February, and it supposedly wasn't in their country yet, and so that we know of, there are statisticians who are collating all the data of how many people have gotten sick, and what the statistics are saying after a year of matching up global data of how many people have gotten sick and how many people have died. The statistics are in line with the end of a pandemic. Right now, in September, the death rate is going down, even though people are still dying, and the infection rate is going down.
Globally.
Globally. Now, there are places in the world where there are going to be flare-ups.
Spikes.
We've had a lot of cases recently in Butte, quite possibly because of the increase in air pollution, which inflames your immune system and causes you to get sick more easily. So, no, SARS-CoV-2 is not going away biologically. Well, not biologically.
What happened to MERS? Did it go away?
That's like one of my biggest questions. I'm like, MERS was killing a lot of people. It was killing a super high rate of the number of people.
And they contained it.
And somehow MERS is not killing people anymore, as far as we know.
So between SARS-CoV-2 and something like MERS was
super deadly,
killing people beyond the normal influenza death. The people who are vulnerable to die of influenza is about the same as the people who are vulnerable to die of SARS-CoV-2. So it's not affecting the general population any differently, statistically speaking,
and now this is where,
than a virus. Now, some people may be dying because it's a new virus, there's less immunity, but it's the age group and the vulnerable groups are similar to influenza groups.
And that's the sort of thing that makes people be like, well, you must just love Trump then.
No. MERS was a virus that traveled outside of the main victims of these kinds of viruses.
Yes.
And left a quicker trail of bodies.
Right.
So they were, I guess, able to isolate
better
and stop it from spreading.
I really want to talk to somebody.
I don't know if that's what happened. Somebody please tell me what happened to MERS.
Because that's kind of the control group in my mind. Like, well, if MERS was way more deadly than SARS-CoV-2, like MERS had like a 47% death rate.
Yeah.
If MERS was way more deadly, why did not millions of people die? Why was it contained? I really do want to look into that because I think that will explain to us better what's going on with SARS-CoV-2 right now. And also, I think it's important. I want to rephrase what you said because that's really important. Typically, a pandemic is called when unexpectedly high amounts of people die who do not normally die from these kinds of infections. The young and people with no pre-existing conditions. And statistically, according to the CDC's data and the WHO's data and the National Health Service's data and Johns Hopkins data, there's just kind of been a normal amount of people dying whenever a new virus shows up in the system and in the planet, and that sucks. It super sucks, but it's kind of the same people who die during a bad influenza A and B year. And so like that's we're ranging out from the topics. We care about people. We're not saying people are not dying. And obviously I don't want my friends with pre-existing conditions to die either. We also feel like the universal health mandates and lockdowns are doing more harm than good, and that we could be implementing specific techniques to protect people with pre-existing conditions that would enable people who are not susceptible to continue the overall health of the planet by going back to school, things like that.
I just shared a link with a website that my co-host found called the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine. They're out of Oxford. And they promote and disseminate better evidence for healthcare. That's their tagline. CEBM. So you can find cebm.net. I didn't share the general website. I shared a link to an article back from April. And it's called COVID-19 Deaths Compared with Swine Flu.
And what they're basically saying is...
We can say what they said.
Yeah, say what they said. You got it right there.
I'll read it right here.
Look, we're not doctors.
We're not doctors,
but we read a lot of stuff by doctors and we're sharing it with you.
So we're reading from the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine. And they say pandemic, as the definition goes, is the worldwide spread of a new disease. So this fits that definition. Most of the historical analysis point to those in younger age groups being disproportionately affected in a pandemic. as opposed to seasonal outbreaks where older people are more likely to be affected. In this current pandemic, the age structure of those most affected reveals a tension between whether COVID-19 is operating more like a seasonal viral effect or is similar to its effect to previous pandemics. So they're going to compare the swine flu. The U.S. Center for Disease Control estimated that 150,000 to 575,000 people died from H1N1.
Which is the swine flu.
The pandemic virus infection in the first year of the outbreak. 80% of the virus-related deaths were estimated to occur in those greater than 65 years of age. In seasonal influenza epidemics, about 70 to 90% of deaths occur in people greater than 65. However, typical influenza causes most of its deaths among the elderly, while most severe cases occur most commonly in people with a variety of medical conditions. By contrast, the H1N1 pandemic caused most of its severe or fatal disease in younger people, both those with chronic conditions as well as healthy persons, and caused many more cases of viral pneumonia than is normally seen in a seasonal influenza.
So the cold, hard way of saying that is that there are a certain amount of expected global deaths with any given health event. And when you call a pandemic, it should be called because there are unexpected amounts of deaths in unexpected demographic categories.
In a pandemic, the proportion of deaths among the young should increase. And several studies have further demonstrated this age shift in deaths to younger populations. In a 1918 scenario, the major prevention strategies are to target younger people to minimize the loss of expected years of life. An analysis of 3 other pandemics over the last century also suggests pandemic viruses cause excess mortality in unusually young populations. They are not seeing that with this pandemic.
And there's a difference between death count and death rate. Sam brought up a good point.
Yes.
A particle, something can be the same level of deadliness, particle to particle, and yet the one that spreads faster and in more ways, like airborne, surface, contact, fluids, is always going to kill more people and is therefore considered more deadly. So technically, SARS-CoV-2 is more deadly than MERS was because about 200,000 people have died while infected with SARS-CoV-2, whereas only I think like 1,800 people died of MERS. However, we have to bear in mind when we're looking at these cold hard facts, there's a difference between the death count, which is the number of people who've died,
that we know of.
And the death rate, which is of a number of people who were infected, what percentage of people who encountered the virus die.
Yeah.
So when people are like, well, but it's more deadly, you really need to be like, are we looking at the number of deaths total, which is a tragic number, or are we looking at the rate of death? What is your likelihood of dying if you are infected with SARS-CoV-2? And it is very low compared to past pandemics.
It's at this point, the numbers are, I haven't seen any data where the numbers are below 98%.
What numbers
that
of
the
likelihood of dying?
Likelihood of dying is at most 2%.
Mm-hmm.
People are saying 0.05% on another extreme. So it spreads easily, apparently.
It does.
It apparently doesn't kill easily.
Well, in this, we have 2 jumping off points from this current
in
conversation.
terms of death rate.
As long as the 11 or so folks that are listening in want to talk a little bit longer, I think the 2 important jumping off points to talk about here are whenever you say, but it doesn't kill a very high percentage of people,
right?
People are like, but what about long-term health effects?
Right.
And then the other thing that I want to bring up is why do we keep talking about SARS-CoV-2 and trying to explain how it's not as deadly as we were told in March?
We were told that it could be something like H1N1. We were told it could be something like MERS, where there would just be a massive wipeout. And I think we got traumatized by that news cycle because the story was in February that we didn't have the virus. Since then, the story is the virus was likely here months before. So when New York went off with their death rate spike in March, that was not the beginning of the virus for New York. That was the peak of the virus for New York when we tuned in at the peak of the deaths
Right.
in New York.
The U.S.
In New York, specifically. Yeah. Since March, globally, the death rate has been in decline. There have been spikes as the virus affected people.
As people get back out of their houses finally.
But the virus has been in a death rate decline globally since March.
Most parts of the planet are back to pre-pandemic death rates, as in the normal amount of people are dying that usually die.
So when you say this is a deadly pandemic, it's a relative thing to say. Because I think the fear when we said, oh my God, the virus came and suddenly New York was blown out.
And that was horrible.
That came from a perception that the virus just landed and was just annihilating everyone.
Yeah.
When I think the story is going to play out that the virus had been here for a long time and was just hitting its peak when we tuned in.
Yeah.
So I can understand why people think this is a abnormally dangerous virus when we're finding out that it's a little more dangerous than other existing viruses that we've dealt with that we did not take all these precautions for.
And as we were talking about with Evno, it's difficult to have these sorts of nuanced conversations right now because a lot of people are experiencing a lot of political trauma. And when we say something that rings a bell, that sounds like something that President Trump has said, it puts people into a shutdown protective mode, where the information cannot come in because the bad guy said it. And I acknowledge that trauma. That's a real trauma. And I know that there are a lot of people who are having a way shittier time than we are having with the current political climate. And it's not because we're not also disgusted by the way that the president is acting right now. But I think when you say it's turning out that SARS-CoV-2 is just like a little bit more of a worse cold season, it's a trigger, and I want to acknowledge for people that in the comments that might not be aware, that's a trigger, and what that means is when that sort of sentence comes up, people stop being able to listen to anything else that's going on because it makes them feel unsafe. And even though the data is pointing that way, that's
no matter how many caveats and disclaimers you do.
Yeah.
We've become dogmatic, and on issues of health and virus, it doesn't lend itself well to a black and white. It's a complex issue that deserves some non-emotional, complex analysis.
Because we are not emotional does not mean we do not care.
Right.
I think it's...
facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah, facts don't care about your feelings. I think it's important to note, tagging on with what you were just talking about, Dark, that if you look at the CDC's data for influenza A and B seasonal cold and flu season deaths, 2019 fall and winter of 2020 were worse than usual.
Right.
It is very likely, although we may never know, that SARS-CoV-2 was already in the U.S. this winter, and those deaths, because we didn't know to test for SARS-CoV-2, were in large part because of that virus already spreading around the planet. And when it hits somewhere like New York City in the dead of winter that is full of pollution, and that of course a place like that is going to have a death spike because you already have a ton of inflamed people walking around.
They're finding that a lot of the largest, most dramatic death rate spikes were in places with high PM2 in the atmosphere, high particulate matter from toxic sources. So, and that's not good for your immune system. So they're finding that it's concentration of people, but it's also the concentration of pollution. And that some would say that an incidental effect of the lockdown was that it may have saved lives because industry had shut down. And as industry shut down, there was less PM2 in the atmosphere that was compromising people's immune systems. And when a year goes by or 2 years go by and we can take all the data and figure out what we're looking for in terms of what policies worked best and what policies did not work best, I think we'll find that a lot of the way that we're looking through the lens of the danger of the pandemic, in the beginning it was the death number, people were calling to. Now everybody I see is sharing case numbers, but they're not saying whether or not these cases are people who are sick with.
It's not that everybody, so you may think that everybody who is a new case number in your town is because that person was sick and they went and got tested and they were like, yep, you're sick with SARS-CoV-2/COVID. What's actually happening is a large portion of people are having to take mandatory tests to return to work in the film industry.
Right.
People are having to take mandatory tests to travel. People are having to take mandatory tests to work in jobs that have to do with children or the elderly. And a lot of those people are coming up as having SARS-CoV-2 in their system, which happens all the time.
Yep.
Up to 5 pounds of your individual body is made up of other genetic material that is not you at any given time. This is just the way that the environment of the planet works. Viruses are always coming in and out of us, and our susceptibility to illness goes up and down. And I think it would be very enlightening and relieving and alleviate suffering if our various health departments would let us know how many cases had tested positive in our county and how many of those people were actually ill.
How many people got ill from the virus, and who are they? What is their risk factor? Should we be taking care of other people with those risk factors?
Yeah.
We're not doing what we could be doing as a society to be informed on the issue. We're just shaming each other into
Everybody do
how
the
to
same
behave.
thing. Yeah, everybody do the same
Which
thing.
is based on a lot of information that came from the trauma of the onset of the virus, in my opinion. So it's a complex issue, and we should be looking at it through complex lenses. Right now, we're not going to know all the answers. Apparently, in England right now, your risk of dying from SARS-CoV-2 is about the same as your risk from dying from taking a bath.
Which does not mean people don't die from taking a bath.
That's a legitimate newspaper article with a guy with letters behind his name.
Legitimate statistics from a verified source.
I'm not going to share it. You can look it up. Look up dying from a bathtub and dying from SARS-CoV-2 in England, and you'll find the article.
I appreciate Terror Time bringing this question up. I really appreciate their participation in
Yes.
a lot of our conversations.
Yeah.
We started focusing more heavily on SARS-CoV-2 research and the progression of the disease on the planet, or the progression of the virus on the planet, because we want to help alleviate suffering. And a lot of people are still suffering under the idea that we don't know what this virus is doing, we don't know how it behaves, we don't know when it's going to end, and we can't know how to protect ourselves. And all of those are false statements. There is data out there that shows us how this virus behaves, who is at risk, and how we could better be protecting ourselves, but nobody's talking about it.
There's a question we can be asking ourselves, which is, how do we know when it's over?
How will you know when it's over?
That was...
What are you following to help you
How do
find
you
out?
know?
Where are you getting your data?
So we were banned from the radio station because we were asking these questions. How do we know when the pandemic is over? How do we... And I don't want to be completely politically cynical and say, which I did once, off the top, being really flippant, is that there will be a change in the virus narrative after the election in November. And I don't think it should be that way. I think we could be doing things right now with the information that we know right now, but it would interfere, unfortunately, with politicians who are running for office and they have stances according to policy. And to say, you know what, maybe the lockdown policy is causing more harm than not. If that data shows that the lockdown policy is not slowing the spread significantly, compared cost-benefit analysis to the damage that it's doing, for a politician to admit that when that was their stance and the election is coming as a month would be political suicide.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, a lot of the news that you're watching is informed by the political dialogue, and the political dialogue is not medically feasible. It's not based in the current data.
Right.
It's based in a narrative that is tied into political narrative. And if you're getting your news from MSNBC or the Washington Post, you're getting a political medical narrative. There are some articles that come out, the New York Times, Forbes magazine. They say some things that punch a hole in the general narrative, but the overriding availability of information is not current. It's not giving you current, useful information about how to make a choice for your business, your children, your school.
Fads. There are a lot of fads and trends. There are a lot of fads and trends right now around what the right thing to do is. There is also a lot of information online that you can find. And of course, you've got to follow local government mandates. You've got to abide by certain things in your business that are being required by the government. And again, we each have to take personal responsibility for the choices that we make based on the education that we give ourselves. And that might mean that you make a choice that inhibits a local business for a long period of time, or it might mean that you make a choice that unfortunately enables somebody to get really sick in a way that they wouldn't have gotten really sick if you had made other choices. I think radical personal responsibility is important. I think there are a lot of people who are so tired of feeling like it's their job to fix things that they're really relieved to just have some organization tell them what the right thing to do is. And if I see you doing that thing, I know you are also doing the right thing, and I don't have to think about it because I'm exhausted and I'm traumatized. But I think it's really important for each individual person to evaluate where are you getting your data from, and how will you know when it is getting better? Are you waiting for a politician that you care about to tell you when SARS-CoV-2 pandemic is lessening? Are you waiting for the CDC or the WHO to tell you when the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic is over? Are you waiting for local health policies to change so that then you'll know the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic is over?
Are you waiting for a vaccine?
Are you waiting for a vaccine?
We'll just leave that one. I just made a post on our comment section here. It is from a website called Retraction Watch. And they have a whole section on retracted coronavirus COVID-19 papers. So these are papers that said, maybe this is what's happening. And then they're like, well, it's not peer reviewed.
Wrong.
Well, they don't know they're wrong. What I'm saying is that there's data that's coming out that hasn't been peer reviewed. And because it's not peer reviewed, or if somebody says, hey, you can't publish that data because we don't have enough information, then they retract it. Some of this information may end up being correct over time. Some of this information being retracted may show that something that you're laboring under is no longer correct. It's another resource to look at the cutting edge dialogue around what is this virus and what is going on with this virus and what can we do to prepare ourselves for the future around this virus.
Thanks, Internet.
Yeah, so that is it's Retraction Watch, and as a website, they look at medical papers and scientific papers that have been retracted. I think if you want to know what's going on, it's a nice resource. So we've shared that in the comments.
So that was a whole bit.
Yeah.
It was a whole bit about SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19.
Yeah.
Which are both different terms than coronavirus, because there are several coronaviruses. The common cold is like 15% of all common colds are caused by a different coronavirus, not SARS-CoV-2. Now what?
Well, we just want to remind everybody we're working on putting together a studio, so you don't just have to look at this curtain.
Right. And we want there's this special box that you can get where you plug your camera into the box, and then you plug the box into the computer, and then that means that we can do interviews from all over the world that you guys can participate in.
Right. That's what we're looking for.
We want to get one of those.
We're trying to move the dialogue forward and have more people in the studio than just ourselves. So thanks everybody who tuned in today. I do have a paper I'm working on right now that will get more into the details of the content that we were doing that helped get us banned from America's Most Radio. We've been talking about censorship and the importance to not do it for 2 weeks, but now that we've sort of ended that campaign, for the most part, I would like to talk a little more about the misunderstandings and the climate that we're living in that led to a liberal-leaning, community-based media organization to use McCarthyism-style censorship on dissenting voices. So that paper's coming out soon. Stay tuned for that.
About all of the things that go around with that sort of thing.
Right. So thanks for tuning in today. We've got a lot of stuff in the works, and it's not all about SARS-CoV-2.
Yes, and thank you for the suggestion to include a conversation where we talk with 2 addiction specialists of different perspectives and kind of begin to be a part of evolving that conversation around what addiction is and how people suffer from it. And then we also want to talk about radical consent language. I think it's something that's more accessible to the general populace now that we've all gotten in the habit of asking if it's okay to give someone a hug because maybe they're sick and they're trying to stay away.
Yeah.
And then, of course, mer people, aliens, and etc. So
yeah, I'd also like to talk about irony, the importance of irony in understanding your world. That's a topic that I'd like to delve into in upcoming shows. We also are now liberated from certain taboo areas that we could not discuss while on America's Most Radio.
So we're gonna bring a sex therapist online with us.
We're going to talk about sex.
And we're going to talk about drugs.
In a more open way than we could, out of respect for the important community resource that we were using.
Yes. And the fact that children might be listening.
The children. Think of the children.
Now, since I'm only putting this online, I can put a trigger warning in the title of the video, and then people won't click on it if it's a topic they don't want to know about.
So add your interests. If there are things that you would like for us to talk about, avenues to explore, you don't have to say it publicly. You can send
you can send us in a message.
Private message. Hey.
Speaking of consent,
Yes.
my policy is if I ever get anything in a private message, whether to me or to the Post-Orthodoxy Facebook page, I don't use your name.
Unless you say we
Unless
can
you
use your
say
name.
also you can use my name,
Yeah.
DJ Savage says, I always feel that everything happens for a reason, and I believe that this is one of them. I understand that I could have listened to you live online when you were at the station on their website, but I prefer the podcast setup instead. It feels more personal.
Oh, nice.
With social media and digital format, I believe that you will grow.
Yeah, we're looking forward to serving you guys and more folks. We think there's some interesting dialogues we could be having, and we could be having a better time if we were having better conversations about the problems that we face.
Cindy Marjama says, it's good to hear you guys again.
Oh, yay.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah,
Cindy.
thanks for tuning in, folks.
I want to honor a previous comment that DJ Savage put in
Please.
here, and then we shared a bunch of resources and didn't
And we'll
get
take
to it.
more questions and comments.
Yeah, we're not
as
like
long
trying
as
to
we're
end
doing
the
it,
thing.
yeah.
We're coming up on the 2-hour point, and I'm really glad
Wow.
that our video didn't get cut off. I feel like we had way more fun this time than I've had in a while
Only 1 hour point.
doing our show. It started. They're just going to say 1 hour until it's totally 2 hours.
Dig it.
Yeah. DJ said earlier, I believe that SARS-CoV-2 affects people differently when it actually touches their lives personally.
Yeah.
Many people don't believe in it and then change their minds when they lose somebody close to them.
Right.
That's very true. I think a lot of our friends at the radio station thought that because we weren't personally affected, we didn't care. Because if we were personally affected, to me, then that's like, if I was personally affected, I would still absolutely be digging into all the data.
Certainly.
But I do understand. I do that exercise with myself a lot.
Right.
The whole summer, I would be like, look, if we found out that my little sister had childhood leukemia and we didn't know it yet, and because of that autoimmune dysfunction, she got SARS-CoV-2 and was perilously ill, I would still be doing this research.
I think part of the way that question is formed, can you read the question again? Can you read the statement again? Sorry.
He said, I'd have to scroll all the way back up to it, but
Okay.
he said basically a lot of people that do not believe in it change their minds when it affects them personally.
And so I think
the believe in it statement is a problem.
I think there's an assumption
Not a problem to you,
that
DJ.
if let's say she and I are questioning the narrative around the virus as to how accurate the narrative is in terms of its spread, of its dangerousness, of the preventions that are working or not working. Does hydroxychloroquine work or not? Does it work sometimes or not? Is it a taboo subject to even say something that Trump likes? These are the things that make people say, oh, you're questioning the narrative, you don't think it's real. I don't necessarily think that the mainstream narrative is accurate. It doesn't mean I don't think that SARS-CoV-2 is real.
That's like saying I don't believe in dirt.
Yeah. Dirt could be good or bad depending on where you put it.
Yeah, and it exists whether you want it to exist or not.
Right.
However, the hype around how bad dirt is for you is different from parent to parent. Some parents believe that it's perfectly safe for a kid to roll around in the dirt and lick rocks, and other parents think that that's the worst thing ever. And there's been a certain kind of hype around the existence of SARS-CoV-2 that we feel is misleading and causing suffering.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah. Terror Time says, drug-free for life, but he can't wait for our drug talk. They can't wait. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking around the orthodoxies of neurochemistry. And should we have the freedom of cognitive liberty and to be able to use new things on the planet, as well as old traditional medicines, to change our cognitive functioning to operate in a better way? Do we have the right to find a better way of being while using something that is illegal? And how did it become illegal? And should it continue to stay illegal?
Sam Thompson says, I still roll in the dirt and lick rocks.
Yeah.
It's probably why your immune system is so healthy. At least that's what I was told.
Yeah.
I was told as a kid, like, you didn't get sick very much because you got really sick when you were 6 and you went to first grade and everybody was snotty for a whole year. And then you're basically fine.
George Carlin has the famous bit of, like, nobody in my neighborhood got polio because we were literally swimming in shit. We swam in the East River. So
Oh my gosh.
we had the best immune system ever and we didn't get polio because we were literally swimming in shit. So, anyway, immune systems need to work to continue to work.
Yes, use it or lose it.
Yeah.
They're largely misunderstood and we're largely miseducated about how the immune system works.
And I also look for, looking for debunkers.
Oh, yeah.
I would like people who would vocally tell us that we are way off the mark. Because
Oh, yeah.
that's
It
what
was
I'm
like,
looking
send
for.
me your sources.
Yeah. I am looking for somebody to tell me in definitive terms why we should not be exploring bioterrain theory as another layer to understand viruses and an immune response.
Maybe we are part of the planet and the ecosystem instead of maybe we keep ourselves safe by staying separate from the ecosystem.
I think when you look up bioterrain theory, they call it a pseudoscience.
Leading.
So I'm looking for people who can debunk the pseudoscience label or debunk the idea that it's even worth paying attention to at all. So bioterrain theory, if you're not aware of it, it's easy to Google.
We're going to start doing shorter episodes more often. We like doing these 2-hour shows. It's also really hard to edit these shows and put them on the podcast website. And we want to be hanging out with you guys more often.
Yeah.
We definitely all need a more regular break from the shit storm that is all this psycho-emotional stuff going around. And so we're looking for hot news stories, interesting people, stuff that everybody's fighting about. For instance, Cuties on Netflix.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that.
We got to do some serious research because in the age of QAnon being an organization that hunts down pedophiles and has a really bad name right now for obvious reasons, and in the age of Jeffrey Epstein and the age of #SaveOurChildren, Cuties has entered the scene. It's also the age of feminism and the age of sexual liberation and the age of LGBTQ rights, and a lot of people think that the LGBTQ plus community is trying to include pedophilia in the LGBTQ spectrum, and that is not the case. And so to even touch the concept of this documentary style film on Netflix is like, we're willing to do the hard work and talk about the stuff that you're just not supposed to talk about. And so I want to read a lot of opinions. I've already read some opinions from people of color, and international people of color who are the original audience that this film was made with and from. It's made by an international woman of color, from France, and she says that she made this film to be a commentary on the over-sexualization of children and about how a young girl takes back her childhood, basically, after falling prey to some of the like, girls gotta be sexy or they're not worth anything hype that's going around the internet these days. And then there are other people on various teams who are just like, I don't even need to watch it, it's obviously bad. So that might be the end of our live stream. It might have just cut out, I don't know.
It's still working over here. So
But yeah, anyway, we're going to talk about Cuties,
folks.
and I know it's a rough one.
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for responding and getting involved in the dialogue. That's what we're after, is we are sharing our process, and we are always looking to the critique of the process that we're in the midst of.
Send
in order
us sources.
to be better travelers on the road towards Towards what?
Our friends are dropping like flies.
Yeah.
And so we're willing, like...
There's a lot of people not talking to us
These
this
conversations are important, and we're willing to talk about the stuff that maybe... If you have something and you want to message us privately and you're like, can we talk about this thing? Because I am worried about doing this research on my work computer. We'll do it. You know? Like, it's like that whole thing with Voldemort. Like, not saying his name gives him more power over you.
Greg Hanley said, I think KBMF needs to get back to their roots. I feel they've changed a bit this last year.
I wonder. I wonder what Greg's long-term experience of KBMF has been.
Right.
I know a lot of DJs talk about politics now that didn't used to talk about politics. We were just talking about the wrong kind of politics.
To be fair, when I started at the radio station, when we started the radio station, I told the station manager that I was happy to be a part of KBMF for the first 3 years because that's where all the weird shit happens. Because it's not in a box yet. And in the first 3 years, we did some wonderful weird things. We got to have complete freedom with the way that we branded our station. We got to say it was America's Most Radio, which, what does that mean, really? We got to start a news team spontaneously and go to one of the most important news stories of the end of the last century.
Standing Rock.
We got to build a global partnership with a radio station on the other side of the planet. These are things that were possible when the station was young, and I have apprehension that they're no longer possible because once a nonprofit starts to have politics on their board, possibility gets limited. And so I really love KBMF and the opportunities that it afforded me to have an interaction with my community through the airwaves and through the internet.
Yeah.
And it will continue to do that for many different people in many different ways. And if you want to take your turn at the helm, you can always go to the KBMF website and find out how to be a programmer.
Yeah, you could be a DJ. Totally. Yeah. They're doing trainings. It's a little different now because of SARS-CoV-2 precautions, but you can do a training and become a DJ at KBMF and have your own show. There are some open slots now.
Yeah, there's some open slots now.
Now that we've been kicked off and I can't do the kids show anymore.
Very well then.
All right, guys. You've
Thanks
been awesome. This is a great afternoon. Thank you so much for these conversations. We miss talking to you all, and we'll do it more soon again, better next time.
Yeah, thanks for tuning into our first Gonzo show of the new season.
Yeah.
Every show will only get better from here.
We didn't get cut off the air.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Have a good afternoon.